Sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. In a world where stolen valor runs rampant and military imposters flood social media with fake stories, one woman's deception seemed like just another case for the books. Military police officers had seen it all before. Civilians wearing uniforms they never earned, claiming battles they never fought, stealing honor that belonged to others. But what happens when the person everyone believes is lying isn't? What happens when a quiet woman sitting in an interrogation room, accused of impersonating one of the military's most elite forces, holds a secret so profound that it could change everything the Navy thought it knew about its own history? This is the story of Sarah Chun, a software engineer from San Diego who walked into a veterans event wearing a Navy SEAL trident pin. Within hours, she was in handcuffs, facing federal charges for stolen valor. The evidence seemed overwhelming. The case appeared closed, until a decorated admiral walked into that interrogation room, took one look at a faded tattoo on her arm, and whispered 4 words that would shake the military establishment to its core. That tattoo's the real deal. What followed would expose a decades-old cover-up, reveal a secret program that officially never existed, and prove that sometimes the most unbelievable truth hides behind the most obvious lie. This is her story. This is the truth they try to bury. This is what happens when honor meets deception, when courage faces bureaucracy, and when one woman's fight for recognition becomes a battle for the very soul of military integrity. The morning sun cast long shadows across the San Diego Veterans Memorial Hall as Sarah Chun adjusted the small SEAL trident pin on her navy blue blazer. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of memory she had carried in silence for over 2 decades. Today was different. Today, she would finally attend a veterans gathering, not as an observer hiding in the back, but as someone who belonged. The hall buzzed with familiar military energy. Veterans from different eras clustered around tables, their voices mixing stories of deployment, brotherhood, and sacrifice. Sarah recognized the rhythm of military conversations, the shorthand language, the respectful nods between warriors who understood things civilians never could. She had missed this more than she realized. "Excuse me, ma'am." The voice came from behind her, professional but stern. Sarah turned to see a man in his 40s wearing a polo shirt with military police embroidered on the chest. His eyes had already fixed on the trident pin at her lapel. "Could I have a word with you?" Sarah's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. "Of course. I'm Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I've been getting some reports about someone wearing unauthorized insignia." His gaze never left the pin. "Mind if I ask about your service record?" The conversations around them began to quiet. Other veterans turned to watch, their faces showing mixtures of curiosity and disapproval. Sarah recognized the look. She had seen it before, directed at the growing number of military imposters who plague veteran communities. "I served," she said simply. "Where and when?" Rodriguez pulled out a small notepad, his movements practiced and efficient. "That's complicated." The sergeant's expression hardened. "Ma'am, either you served or you didn't. There's nothing complicated about it." Sarah glanced around the room. More eyes were on her now. She could hear whispered conversations, catch fragments like stolen valor and another fake. The weight of decades-old secrets pressed against her chest. "I did serve," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "But my records are classified." Rodriguez actually chuckled. "Right. Let me guess. You were in some secret mission that doesn't exist in any database." "Actually, yes." The room had gone completely silent now. Someone in the back called out, "Come on, lady. We've heard every excuse in the book." Another voice joined in, "Just admit you bought that pin online and move on." Rodriguez held up his hand for quiet. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification. And I should inform you that impersonating a member of the armed forces is a federal crime." Sarah reached into her purse with steady hands and withdrew her driver's license. "Sarah Chun, and I know exactly what the penalties are for stolen valor, Sergeant." Rodriguez studied the license, then looked back at her. "Ms. Chun, according to our records, there's no one by your name who ever completed SEAL training. In fact, women weren't even allowed in the SEALs until very recently, and you're clearly older than any of the current female candidates." "You're right about the official records," Sarah said. But you're wrong about women never serving with the teams. This drew actual laughter from some veterans in the crowd. An older man with a Vietnam service cap stood up. Lady, I was in special operations for 20 years. I know every classified program, every black op. There were never any women in the SEALs. Period. Sarah looked at him with recognition that surprised him. Senior Chief Peterson, isn't it? You trained at Little Creek in 1978. Your instructor was Master Chief Williams, the one everyone called Iron Will. Peterson's face went pale. How do you know that? Because I was there too, Senior Chief. Not as a trainee, but as part of something else entirely. Rodriguez had heard enough. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for violations of 18 U.S.C. 912, impersonating a member of the armed forces. He reached for his handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. As the cold metal closed around her wrists, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. The secret she had carried for 23 years was finally coming to light, even if not in the way she had hoped. The ride to the naval base took 20 minutes through San Diego traffic. Rodriguez sat in front with the driver, occasionally glancing back at Sarah through the partition. She stared out the window at the familiar cityscape, remembering another time she had ridden through these streets in military custody. That time, she had been heading toward a secret that would change her life forever. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service building was a stark concrete structure that projected authority and intimidation. Rodriguez led her through a maze of corridors lined with photos of distinguished service members and commendations from successful investigations. The interrogation room was exactly what Sarah expected. Gray walls, metal table, 2 chairs, and a mirror that was obviously one-way glass. Rodriguez gestured for her to sit while he arranged files on the table. Okay, Ms. Chun, he began, settling into the chair across from her. Let's start from the beginning. When did you first decide to pretend to be a Navy SEAL? I never pretended to be anything, Sergeant. Everything I've told you is true. Rodriguez opened one of the files. According to every database we have access to, no Sarah Chun has ever served in the Navy. No Sarah Chun has ever attended basic underwater demolition training. No Sarah Chun has ever been associated with any SEAL team, past or present. What about classified databases? We checked those too. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Look, I understand the appeal. The SEALs represent the absolute pinnacle of military achievement. But stealing that honor, wearing their insignia when you never earned it, that's not just illegal. It's a betrayal of every man who bled for that trident. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I would never betray the memory of the men who died for this country. Everything I am, everything I've done, has been in service to that memory. Then prove it. I can't. Rodriguez slammed his hand on the table. Because you're lying. Because the program I was part of was classified at a level beyond your clearance, and the records were destroyed to protect national security. This was clearly not the response Rodriguez expected. He studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Sarah had learned long ago to control her expressions, to reveal nothing unless she chose to. Ms. Chun, I've been investigating stolen valor cases for 8 years. I've heard every story, every excuse, every creative explanation for why someone's service record doesn't exist. But I've never had someone stick to their story this consistently. He paused. Either you're the most committed liar I've ever met, or I'm telling the truth. Rodriguez looked through the one-way mirror, clearly communicating with someone on the other side. After a moment, he turned back to Sarah. My supervisor wants to bring in someone else to talk with you. Someone with higher clearance. Sarah nodded. That might be helpful. For the next hour, Sarah waited alone in the room. She used the time to organize her thoughts, to prepare for questions she had hoped never to answer. The memories she had buried began to surface. Cold water training in conditions that should have been impossible. Missions that officially never happened. Teammates whose names were carved on memorials as training accidents rather than heroes killed in action. The door opened, and Rodriguez returned, followed by a woman in a Navy commander's uniform. She was tall, professional, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, and eyes that suggested she had seen things most people never would. Ms. Chun, I'm Commander Patricia Walsh, Deputy Director of Special Operations Security. I understand you're claiming service in a classified program. I'm not claiming anything, Commander. I am stating facts. Commander Walsh sat down and opened a thick folder. I have access to every classified special operations program dating back to 1980. There is no record of any program involving women in SEAL operations. Sarah studied the commander's uniform, noting the ribbons and insignia that told the story of a distinguished career. "Commander, what's your security clearance level?" "That's not something I discuss with suspects." "I'm not asking you to discuss it. I'm asking you to consider whether your clearance covers programs that were so classified they were compartmentalized beyond normal channels." Walsh's expression flickered slightly. "Go on." "In 1999, I was a senior software engineer with the Defense Department working on classified communication systems. I had a top-secret clearance with special access programs. I was recruited for something called Project Deepwater." "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have. It was a SAP within a SAP, compartmentalized to the point where even the Joint Chiefs only knew it existed, not what it involved." Rodriguez looked between the two women, clearly out of his depth. "What's a SAP?" "Special Access Program." Walsh explained without taking her eyes off Sarah. "The most classified type of military operation." She turned back to Sarah. "Continue." "Project Deepwater was designed to test whether civilians with specific skill sets could be integrated into special operations teams for highly specialized missions. The idea was that certain technology-dependent operations required expertise that traditional military training couldn't provide. And you're claiming you were part of this?" "I was the only participant who completed the full program." Walsh closed the folder. "Ms. Chun, you're describing something that sounds plausible, but I have no way to verify any of it. Without documentation, without witnesses, without any official record, what you're telling me is just an elaborate story." Sarah rolled up her left sleeve, revealing a tattoo on her forearm that had been hidden by her blazer. It was small, simple, but distinctive, a trident intertwined with binary code, with numbers that looked like coordinates below it. Both Rodriguez and Walsh leaned forward to study the tattoo. "What is that?" Rodriguez asked. "It's the unofficial insignia of Project Deepwater participants," Sarah said. "The coordinates mark the location of our training facility." Walsh pulled out her phone and entered the coordinates. After a moment, her face went pale. "These coordinates, this is the location of a classified facility in Virginia. A facility that officially doesn't exist." She stood up abruptly. "I need to make a phone call." As Walsh left the room, Rodriguez stared at the tattoo with new interest. "Ms. Chun, assuming any of this is true, why come forward now? Why attend that veterans event knowing it would lead to questions?" Sarah looked down at the tattoo, remembering the day she had gotten it. 3 other people had received identical markings. 2 of them were dead now, killed in operations that appeared in no official records. The third had disappeared completely, his existence erased as thoroughly as the program itself. "Because I've spent 23 years being proud of something I couldn't acknowledge. I've watched men who never served steal the honor of those who did, while I stood silent about my own service. Today, I decided that enough was enough. But if your program was so classified, won't coming forward get you in trouble?" Sarah smiled for the first time since her arrest. "Sergeant, the statute of limitations on my security agreements expired 5 years ago. The people who made me promise to stay silent are mostly dead or retired. And, frankly, after decades of watching stolen valor go unpunished while real service goes unrecognized, I decided the truth was more important than my safety." The door opened, and Commander Walsh returned, but she wasn't alone. Behind her walked a man whose presence immediately changed the energy in the room. He was elderly, but carried himself with unmistakable military bearing, wearing a simple civilian suit that somehow managed to project more authority than any uniform. Rodriguez started to stand, instinctively recognizing rank even in civilian clothes. "Please sit," the man said quietly. He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Ms. Chun, I'm Admiral William Harrison, retired. I served as Assistant Chief of Naval Operations for Special Warfare from 1998 to 2003. Sarah's breath caught. "Admiral Harrison, you know me? You gave me my final briefing before Project Deepwater was terminated. You told me that what I had done would never be officially recognized, but that it mattered." Admiral Harrison walked closer, studying Sarah's face with the intensity of someone trying to match a memory with reality. Sarah Chun, systems specialist, recruited from DARPA. His voice grew softer. The one who volunteered for the water recovery mission when the operation went bad. You remember. I remember everything about that program, Miss Chun, including the fact that your service was supposed to remain classified indefinitely. Sarah gestured to her surroundings. Things change, Admiral. Sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing whether we want it to or not. Admiral Harrison looked at Rodriguez and Walsh. Commander, Sergeant, what I'm about to tell you is still classified, but circumstances require limited disclosure. He turned back to Sarah. Miss Chun, may I see your tattoo? Sarah extended her arm. The Admiral examined the tattoo carefully, paying particular attention to the numbers below the trident and binary code. After a long moment, he straightened up and looked directly at Rodriguez. Sergeant, release Miss Chun immediately. She is not an imposter. Rodriguez looked confused. Sir, I don't understand. Her records are classified beyond your access level, and mine by design. Project Deepwater was a compartmentalized program that officially never existed. Admiral Harrison's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Ms. Chun earned the right to wear that trident through training and operations that would have broken most of the men you consider legitimate SEALs. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a declassification order signed by the Secretary of the Navy 30 minutes ago, authorizing limited disclosure of Project Deepwater for the purpose of validating Ms. Chen's service. Walsh read the paper carefully. This says she completed modified BUD/S training and participated in classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. That's correct. Rodriguez unlocked Sarah's handcuffs with shaking hands. Mom, I apologize. Sarah rubbed her wrists where the metal had chafed. You were doing your job, Sergeant. I don't blame you for that. Admiral Harrison sat down across from her. Miss Chun, why now? Why reveal yourself after all these years? Because the silence was killing me, sir. Because I've watched too many people claim credit for sacrifices they never made while the real stories stay buried. Because someone needs to remember the people who died for operations that officially never happened. The Admiral nodded slowly. The other participants in the program? Martinez died in Iraq in 2001. Johnson was killed in Afghanistan in 2003. Thompson disappeared in 2005 on what was supposed to be his final mission. And you've carried the memory of their service alone. Yes, sir. Admiral Harrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly struggling with old decisions and their consequences. Ms. Chun, when we terminated Project Deepwater, we made choices about secrecy and security that seemed right at the time. But perhaps we didn't consider the cost to the individuals who served. The cost was worth paying, Admiral. What we did mattered. What they died for mattered. I just want their sacrifice to be acknowledged somehow. It will be. Admiral Harrison stood up. Commander Walsh, I want you to prepare a full briefing on Project Deepwater for the Chief of Naval Operations. It's time this program received proper recognition. He turned back to Sarah. Ms. Chun, would you be willing to meet with Navy historians to provide testimony about your service and that of your teammates? Yes, sir. Good. Because their stories deserve to be told, even if in classified venues. He paused at the door. And Miss Chun, you've earned the right to wear that trident anywhere you choose. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As the Admiral left, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in over 2 decades. The weight of isolation finally lifting from her shoulders. The secret was out, at least partially. The truth was beginning to surface. Rodriguez approached her cautiously. Miss Chun, I owe you more than an apology. What you went through, what your teammates went through, I had no idea. How could you? The system was designed to make sure people like you never found out. Will you tell me about them? About Martinez, Johnson, and Thompson? Sarah looked out the small window at the San Diego skyline, thinking of 3 faces that had been with her in every quiet moment for 23 years. They were the best people I ever knew, Sergeant. And yes, I'll tell you about them. Someone should know who they really were. Sarah Chun stared at the secure phone in her Pentagon office, its red light blinking insistently in the fluorescent glare. In 18 months of working classified communication systems for DARPA, she had never seen that particular line activate. According to her supervisor, It connected directly to offices that existed in no organizational charts. The date was March 15th, 1999, and Sarah was 28 years old, unmarried, and completely dedicated to her work developing next-generation encryption protocols for military communications. Her security clearance was so high that most of her colleagues didn't even know what she actually did for the Defense Department. She picked up a phone on the fourth ring. "Ms. Chun, this is Commander Patricia Walsh, Naval Special Operations Command. I need you to report to conference room 2A7 in 30 minutes. Ma'am, I don't have any meetings scheduled today, and I don't think Ms. Chun." The commander's voice was patient but firm. "This is not a request." Sarah hung up and checked her calendar again, even though she knew it was empty after lunch. She had planned to spend the afternoon debugging code for a satellite communication system that wouldn't be deployed for another 3 years. Instead, she found herself walking through corridors of the Pentagon she had never seen before, following signs that led deeper into the building's classified sections. Conference room 2A7 was smaller than she expected, with no windows and walls that hummed slightly with electronic interference. 3 people sat around a circular table, all wearing civilian clothes despite the obvious military bearing in their posture and expressions. "Miss Chun, please sit." The woman who spoke was the same Commander Walsh from the phone call, though she wore a simple business suit rather than a uniform. "Thank you for coming." Sarah took the only empty chair, noting that the other 2 occupants were studying her with the intensity of people evaluating a potential recruit. "Ms. Chun," Commander Walsh continued, "what I'm about to discuss with you is classified at a level requiring special acknowledgement. Before we proceed, I need you to understand that this conversation is voluntary, but once it begins, you'll be bound by security protocols regardless of your decision to participate." Sarah looked around the table. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I understand what this is about." The man to Walsh's right leaned forward. He was perhaps 50, with graying hair and scars on his hands that suggested combat experience. "Ms. Chun, I'm Colonel James Morrison, Army Special Operations. We've been reviewing your background, your work, your psychological evaluations." "My psychological evaluations?" "Standard security clearance assessments," the third person said. She was younger than the others, maybe 35, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Stevens, Defense Intelligence Agency. Your evaluations show extremely high stress tolerance, exceptional problem-solving abilities, and what our analysts describe as adaptive resilience." Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable. "I appreciate the assessment, but I still don't understand why I'm here." Commander Walsh opened a folder marked with more classification warnings than Sarah had ever seen on one document. "Ms. Chun, we're developing a new operational concept for Special Forces. A program that would integrate civilian specialists directly into combat teams for missions requiring technological expertise beyond traditional military training." "You mean putting civilian contractors in combat zones? That's been done before." "No," Colonel Morrison said. "We mean putting civilian specialists through the same training as special operations personnel, then deploying them as full team members on classified missions." The room went quiet as Sarah processed this information. "You're talking about turning civilians into soldiers." "We're talking about turning civilians into warriors," Dr. Stevens corrected. "People who maintain their specialized expertise while gaining the physical and mental capabilities necessary for direct action operations." Sarah laughed, not from humor, but from disbelief. "That's insane. I'm a software engineer, not a soldier. I've never fired a gun in my life." "But you have other qualifications that interest us," Commander Walsh said, consulting her folder. "You're fluent in Mandarin, Arabic, and Russian. You understand complex technical systems that are becoming increasingly important in modern warfare. You've demonstrated the ability to work under extreme pressure and make critical decisions with limited information. And," Colonel Morrison added, "you have no family ties that would be compromised by extended deployments or dangerous assignments." The bluntness of this observation stung, even though it was accurate. Sarah had dedicated her 20s to her career, choosing intellectual challenges over personal relationships. Her parents were both dead, and she had no siblings. In a professional sense, she was ideally unattached. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Dr. Stevens pulled out a different folder. Project Deepwater, a one-year program that would put selected civilians through modified special operations training, then deploy them on missions requiring their specific expertise. Modified how? Shortened in some areas, intensified in others, Colonel Morrison explained. We can't spend 2 years training you like a traditional SEAL, but we can compress the essential skills into 12 months of extremely intensive preparation. Commander Walsh leaned forward. Ms. Chun, this program doesn't officially exist. The people who complete it will have no official military service records. Their missions will be classified beyond normal special operations channels. If they're killed in action, their deaths will be attributed to training accidents or civilian incidents. You're asking me to become a ghost. We're asking you to become something that has never existed before. A civilian with military capabilities, operating in spaces where traditional special operations can't go. Sarah stood up and walked to the wall, thinking. The offer was insane, dangerous, and completely outside anything she had ever considered for her life. It was also the most intriguing challenge anyone had ever presented to her. Why me specifically? Because last month, you designed a communications protocol that our best military engineers couldn't break, Dr. Stevens said. Because you solved the decryption problem that had stumped the NSA for 6 months. Because when we ran psychological simulations of you in high-stress scenarios, you showed better adaptive responses than 70% of our special operations personnel. And, Commander Walsh added, because you're asking the right questions instead of immediately dismissing the idea. Sarah returned to her chair. What would the training involve? Colonel Morrison opened his folder and removed several photographs. Physical conditioning beyond anything you've experienced. Combat training with multiple weapon systems. Underwater operations, parachuting, survival in hostile environments. Medical training sufficient to treat combat wounds. Language immersion to improve your existing skills. And the missions? We can't discuss specifics, Commander Walsh said, but they would involve situations where traditional military approaches have failed or where the presence of obvious military personnel would compromise operational security. Covert operations in countries where we're not supposed to be. Among other things, Sarah studied the faces around the table, trying to read what they weren't saying. How many other people are you recruiting for this program? For total, Dr. Stevens said, each with different specialties. 1 communications expert, 1 electronics specialist, 1 linguist with regional expertise, and 1 computer systems analyst. And I would be the communications expert. You would be the communications expert. Sarah was quiet for several minutes, considering implications and consequences. The offer represented everything she had never wanted for her life, and everything she had never known she might need. If I say no, you return to your current position, Commander Walsh said. This conversation never happened. Your security clearance continues as normal. And if I say yes, you disappear from your current life for approximately 18 months. Your position at DARPA is held under cover of medical leave. When you return, you'll have training and experiences that will follow you for the rest of your life. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair. Ms. Chun, I've been in special operations for 22 years. I've seen soldiers crack under pressures that would destroy most civilians. What we're proposing is dangerous, both physically and psychologically. You could be injured or killed during training. You could be captured or killed during operations. And if you survive everything, you'll have to live with the knowledge of things you can never discuss with another human being. So why offer it to me? Because some missions require capabilities that don't exist in the current military structure, Dr. Stevens said. Because the threats we're facing are evolving faster than our traditional responses. Because sometimes the best tool for a job is something that doesn't officially exist. Sarah looked around the table one more time. 3 people who had dedicated their lives to protecting national security were asking her to join them in something unprecedented and dangerous. The rational response was to decline, return to her safe job, and continue her predictable career. When would training start? 2 weeks from today, Commander Walsh said, at a facility that doesn't appear on any maps. Who are the other participants? Lieutenant Carlos Martinez, Army Special Forces Electronics Specialist. Dr. Elena Johnson, Ph.D. in Middle Eastern Languages and Culture. Staff Sergeant Michael Thompson, marine reconnaissance, computer systems. Active military? Martinez and Thompson are active duty, specially selected for the program. Johnson is a civilian analyst with the State Department. Sarah realized she was seriously considering the offer, which surprised her almost as much as the offer itself. Where would training take place? A private facility in Virginia, Colonel Morrison said. Completely isolated, completely secure. For the duration of training, you would have no contact with the outside world except for emergencies. What kind of emergencies? The kind that would end your participation in the program, Dr. Stevens said bluntly. Commander Walsh closed her folder and looked directly at Sarah. Ms. Chun, we need an answer today. The training timeline is fixed, and we can't delay for individual decisions. Sarah thought about her apartment in Arlington, her predictable routines, her work that challenged her intellect, but never her courage. She thought about spending the rest of her career in the same office, solving the same types of problems, living the same careful life. If I'm killed during training or operations, what happens to my family? You have no immediate family, Dr. Stevens said, but any financial arrangements would be handled through classified compensation protocols. And if I complete the program successfully, you'll have capabilities and experiences possessed by perhaps a dozen people in the world, Colonel Morrison said. You'll also have responsibilities and knowledge that will follow you forever. Sarah stood up again and walked to the far wall, away from the table. She had always been careful, always chosen the safe path, always prioritized security over adventure. The offer terrified her, but it also awakened something she hadn't realized was sleeping. Ms. Chun, Commander Walsh prompted. Sarah turned around. I have conditions. Go ahead. I want to meet the other participants before training begins. I want to understand exactly what medical coverage is provided if I'm injured. And I want a written guarantee that if I complete training but decide not to participate in operations, I can withdraw without penalty. Agreed, Commander Walsh said without hesitation. Then, yes, I'll do it. The three recruiters exchanged glances that suggested they had expected this answer, but were still relieved to hear it. Ms. Chun, Dr. Stevens said, you'll receive detailed instructions within 48 hours. Until then, discuss this with no one. Prepare for an extended absence from your current life. And understand that from this moment forward, you're part of something that will change you permanently. As Sarah left conference room 2-7, she felt simultaneously excited and terrified. She had just committed to something beyond her comprehension, agreed to training that could kill her, and accepted responsibilities she couldn't yet imagine. 2 weeks later, she stood in front of a nondescript building in rural Virginia, looking at three other people who had made the same impossible decision she had. Lieutenant Martinez was younger than she expected, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes and hands that moved constantly, as if he were mentally disassembling everything he saw. Dr. Johnson was tall and serious, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. Staff Sergeant Thompson was built like a machine, all functional muscle and controlled energy. Their instructor was a man who introduced himself only as Chief Petty Officer Williams, though everyone called him Master Chief. He was perhaps 45, weathered by sun and salt water, with scars that told stories he would never share. Ladies and gentlemen, Master Chief Williams said as they stood in formation outside the training facility, you are about to begin the most intensive military training program ever designed for civilians. Some of you will fail. Some of you may be injured. All of you will be changed. He walked along their line, studying each face. You have volunteered for Project Deepwater because you possess skills the military needs and cannot develop internally. But skills mean nothing without the warrior mindset to employ them effectively. Sarah felt a chill as his eyes met hers. For the next 12 months, you will live, eat, sleep, and think like Navy SEALs. You will endure physical trials designed to break you mentally. You will learn to kill efficiently and without hesitation. You will discover capabilities you never knew you possessed. He stopped in front of the group. When you complete this training, you'll be sent on missions that officially do not exist in support of operations that will never be acknowledged. You will risk your lives for objectives you may never fully understand. Master Chief Williams smiled for the first time, and It was not a comforting expression. Welcome to Project Deepwater. Let's begin. The water was colder than anything Sarah had ever experienced, even in the worst nightmares that had begun plaguing her sleep. It was 4:47 a.m., and the Chesapeake Bay felt like liquid ice against her wet suit as she struggled to keep pace with her three teammates. They were 7 months into Project Deepwater training, and Master Chief Williams had just announced that today's exercise would determine whether any of them were ready for the final phase. "Chun, you're falling behind." Master Chief's voice carried across the water from the support boat. "Either catch up or quit." Sarah forced her muscles to work despite the numbness spreading through her limbs. Beside her, Carlos Martinez maintained the steady rhythm that had gotten him through Army Special Forces training, while Elena Johnson moved through the water with surprising grace for someone who had spent most of her life in libraries. Michael Thompson swam like a machine, as he did everything else, with mechanical precision and unwavering determination. They had been in the water for 2 hours, swimming a course that would have challenged experienced SEALs. For civilian recruits, it should have been impossible, but Project Deepwater was designed to prove that impossible was just another word for difficult. Sarah's lungs burned as she pushed herself to match Thompson's pace. 7 months of training had transformed her body in ways she never could have imagined. The software engineer who had walked into that conference room in March was gone, replaced by someone with calloused hands, scarred knuckles, and muscles that responded instantly to her mental commands. The physical transformation had been the easy part. The psychological changes ran deeper. Checkpoint 3. Master Chief called out as they reached a buoy marking the halfway point of their course. "Martinez, Johnson, you're moving like civilians. Thompson, good pace. Chun, you're stronger than you think you are. Stop holding back." Sarah had learned that Master Chief's criticisms were actually encouragements. When he told you that you were failing, it meant he believed you could succeed. When he stopped talking to you entirely, that was when you knew you were finished. They turned toward the final leg of the course, a 2-mile swim to a beach where they would transition immediately into a 15-mile run through Virginia wilderness. Sarah had completed this type of combined exercise dozens of times over the past months, but today felt different. Today, something more than endurance was being tested. "Chun, you still with us?" Martinez called out, his voice steady despite the exertion. "Always," she replied, grateful for the encouragement, but knowing she had to find her own strength. The training had bonded the four of them in ways that surprised everyone, including their instructors. They came from completely different backgrounds and had different personalities, but the shared suffering had created a connection stronger than most friendships. They protected each other, pushed each other, and refused to let any member of their group fail. Dr. Johnson had been the first surprise. The quiet academic had displayed a ferocity during combat training that shocked even the experienced instructors. When pushed to her limits, the woman who specialized in ancient languages became a warrior who could kill efficiently and without hesitation. Martinez had proven to be the natural leader, despite Thompson's higher rank and greater military experience. The young lieutenant had an intuitive understanding of team dynamics and an ability to motivate people that couldn't be taught. Thompson was the team's foundation, the steady presence who never wavered, never complained, and never failed to complete any assigned task. His computer expertise was matched by his physical capabilities and his complete reliability under pressure. And Sarah had discovered she was tougher than anyone had imagined, including herself. The woman who had spent her adult life avoiding physical risks had learned to rappel from helicopters, clear buildings under fire, and operate complex communications equipment while being shot at. "Beach," Thompson called out, pointing toward their landing point. They swam the final 100 meters together, hitting the beach simultaneously and immediately stripping off their wetsuits to reveal running gear underneath. The transition had been drilled into them until it became automatic. Out of water, gear off, weapons check, communication equipment operational, movement to the starting line. Master Chief Williams waited at the edge of the beach with a stopwatch and an expression that revealed nothing. 7 minutes, 43 seconds for the swim. That's better than some SEAL teams I've trained. He gestured toward the trail that led into the woods. 15 miles through terrain that will test everything you've learned. You have 2 hours to complete the course. Anyone who finishes in under 90 minutes gets to eat dinner tonight. Sarah grabbed her pack and rifle, checking her equipment with practiced efficiency. 7 months of intensive training had made these actions automatic, but the nervous energy in her stomach reminded her that today was more than just another exercise. Chun, Master Chief called out as the team prepared to move. Your team leader today. Sarah felt her teammates' eyes on her. In 7 months of training, leadership roles had rotated constantly, but never during the most challenging exercises. Being given command today meant something significant was being evaluated. Roger that, Master Chief, she replied, accepting the responsibility without question. They moved out together, following a trail that led through dense forest toward objectives they wouldn't learn about until they reached them. Sarah set a pace that balanced speed with sustainability, knowing that the real test would come at the end when they were exhausted and facing unexpected challenges. The first 5 miles passed smoothly through relatively easy terrain. Sarah monitored her team's condition constantly, noting that Martinez was favoring his left leg slightly and Johnson was breathing harder than normal. Thompson showed no signs of stress, but that was typical for him. Contact front, Martinez called out as they crested a hill. Sarah dropped to one knee and raised her rifle, automatically scanning for threats. In the valley below, she could see figures moving through the trees. The exercise had just become a tactical problem as well as a physical test. 4 targets, spread formation, approximately 400 meters, Thompson reported quietly. Johnson, can you identify? Sarah asked. Dr. Johnson raised her binoculars. Civilian clothes, but military movement patterns. Training cadre playing opposing force. Sarah studied the terrain, planning their approach. 7 months of tactical training had taught her to think like a special operations soldier. But leading her teammates in a live exercise was different from following someone else's orders. We'll move right, use the ridge line for concealment, and try to bypass without contact, she decided. This is endurance training, not combat training. Speed is more important than engagement. They moved through the forest with skills that had been drilled into them through countless exercises. Sarah found herself thinking like a combat leader, constantly evaluating threats, monitoring her team's status, and adjusting their approach based on changing conditions. The bypass worked perfectly. They avoided the opposing force entirely and continued toward their next objective. But Sarah noticed that the exercise was becoming increasingly complex as they progressed. What had started as a simple endurance run was evolving into a comprehensive test of everything they had learned. At the 10-mile mark, they found a checkpoint with new instructions. Retrieve classified materials from a simulated enemy camp, maintain communications with base, and continue to the extraction point without being detected by pursuit teams. This isn't training, Martinez said quietly as he studied the instructions. This is an evaluation. Sarah realized he was right. Today's exercise was their final examination before moving to the operational phase of the program. Everything they had learned, everything they had become, was being tested simultaneously. Johnson, establish communications with base, Sarah ordered. Martinez, reconnaissance on the target building. Thompson, security. I'll plan our approach. They executed the mission with precision that surprised even Sarah. Dr. Johnson's communications equipment worked flawlessly despite the challenging terrain. Martinez identified 3 different ways to approach the target building. Thompson's security perimeter ensured they weren't detected during the operation. Sarah coordinated their movements like someone who had been doing it for years rather than months. The software engineer who had never led anything more challenging than a code review was directing a tactical operation with confidence and skill. They retrieved the classified materials, maintained constant communication with their base, and exfiltrated without alerting the pursuit teams. But as they approached the final checkpoint, Sarah realized the hardest part of the exercise was still ahead. The extraction point was a beach on the Potomac River where they would need to swim to a pickup boat while carrying their equipment and the retrieved materials. After running 15 miles and conducting a tactical operation, they now faced another water obstacle that would test their remaining endurance. Team leader, Master Chief's voice came through Sarah's radio. You have 20 minutes to reach the pickup point. Weather conditions are deteriorating, and extraction may become impossible if you're delayed. Sarah looked at her teammates. They were all exhausted, but none of them showed any intention of quitting. 7 months of training had taught them that impossible was just the beginning of difficult. Into the water, she ordered. We finish this together. They entered the Potomac as a team and swam toward the pickup boat through waters that were rougher than anything they had trained in. Sarah fought against currents that seemed designed to separate them, leading by example and refusing to accept failure when they were so close to completion. 18 minutes later, they hauled themselves onto the pickup boat, wet, exhausted, and successful. Master Chief Williams helped Sarah aboard and looked directly into her eyes. Congratulations, team leader. You just completed the most comprehensive special operations evaluation ever designed for civilian personnel. Sarah looked back at her 3 teammates, realizing that they had all changed irrevocably over the past 7 months. They were no longer the civilians who had walked into the training facility. They had become something new, something that had never existed before. What happens now, she asked. Master Chief smiled, and for once it was a genuinely warm expression. Now you become operational. Your first mission briefing is tomorrow morning. That night, Sarah lay in her bunk thinking about the person she had been 7 months earlier. The careful software engineer seemed like someone from another life. The woman who had completed today's exercise was someone she was still learning to understand. Martinez spoke from the bunk next to hers. Chin, you did good today. Real good. We all did, she replied. We're not the same people we were when this started. No, Johnson agreed from across the room. We're not. Thompson's voice came from the darkness. Question is, are we ready for what comes next? Sarah thought about that as she drifted towards sleep. They had proven they could complete the training, but operational missions would test them in ways that simulation never could. Tomorrow, they would learn what Project Deepwater had really prepared them for. In her dreams that night, Sarah swam through dark water toward objectives she couldn't see, leading teammates she trusted completely toward dangers they couldn't imagine. When she woke the next morning, she felt ready for whatever those dangers might be. The briefing room was smaller than the training facilities, with maps covering the walls and communication equipment Sarah recognized from her previous work. But the atmosphere was different now. This wasn't training. This was preparation for something real. Commander Walsh entered the room carrying classified folders and an expression Sarah had never seen before. Behind her came Admiral Harrison, the man whose presence instantly changed the energy in any room he entered. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Harrison began, you have completed training that proves civilian specialists can be successfully integrated into special operations teams. Your performance exceeded our highest expectations. Sarah felt proud, but also apprehensive. Success in training meant they would be sent on missions that really mattered. Your first operation will take place in 3 weeks, Commander Walsh announced. Target is a communications facility in Afghanistan that has been supporting terrorist operations throughout the region. Sarah exchanged glances with her teammates, realizing that their transformation from civilians to warriors was about to be tested in the most serious way possible. The mission requires capabilities that only your team possesses, Admiral Harrison continued. Traditional special operations have failed to penetrate this facility because of its sophisticated electronic countermeasures. That's where we come in, Martinez said quietly. That's exactly where you come in, the Admiral confirmed. You will deploy as a classified unit supporting broader counterterrorism operations. Your mission will be to penetrate the facility, extract intelligence, and neutralize the communications capabilities. Sarah realized that everything they had trained for was about to become real. The water, the running, the tactical problems, the exhaustion. It had all been preparation for missions like this one. Questions? Commander Walsh asked. Thompson raised his hand. Rules of engagement. You are authorized to use any force necessary to complete the mission and protect yourselves, Admiral Harrison replied. This is a direct action operation in a combat zone. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In 3 weeks, she would be leading her team into real combat, where mistakes meant death and success meant stopping people who were actively trying to kill Americans. We're ready, she said, speaking for all of them. Admiral Harrison nodded. I believe you are. But remember, from this moment forward, you're operating in a world where failure isn't just disappointing. It's deadly. The helicopter flew through the Afghan night without lights, its rotor noise masked by sophisticated sound-dampening technology that made it nearly invisible to ground observers. Sarah Chun sat in the cargo bay, checking her equipment for the third time, her movements automatic after months of training, but her mind focused on the mission ahead. 3 weeks had passed since Admiral Harrison had briefed them on their first operational deployment. 3 weeks of mission-specific training, intelligence briefings, and psychological preparation for combat that would be unlike anything in their simulation exercises. The target was a communications facility hidden in a valley 30 kilometers north of Kandahar. Intelligence indicated the facility was coordinating attacks on coalition forces throughout southern Afghanistan, using sophisticated encryption and frequency-hopping techniques that had defeated conventional intercept efforts. 5 minutes, the helicopter crew chief announced over the intercom. Sarah looked at her 3 teammates, seeing her own combination of excitement and apprehension reflected in their faces. Carlos Martinez sat across from her, methodically checking the explosive charges they would use to destroy the facility's communications equipment. Dr. Elena Johnson reviewed satellite photos of their target one final time, memorizing details that might save their lives in the dark. Michael Thompson cleaned his rifle with the focused attention he brought to everything, his movements precise and economical. Project Deepwater's first operational mission was about to begin. Chun, Martinez called out over the engine noise. You good? Sarah gave him a thumbs up, though good was a relative term. She was terrified, excited, and more focused than she had ever been in her life. 7 months of training had prepared her body for what was coming, but her mind was still adjusting to the reality of combat operations. 30 seconds, the crew chief announced. Sarah activated her communication equipment and established contact with their command post. Control, this is Deepwater Team. Communication, check. Deepwater Team, this is Control. You're 5x5. Weather conditions are optimal. No reported enemy activity in your area. Roger, Control. Standing by for insertion. The helicopter flared suddenly as it approached their landing zone, and Sarah felt her stomach drop as they descended rapidly toward the Afghan countryside. Through the open door, she could see rocky terrain illuminated by starlight, empty and hostile. Go, 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 the crew chief shouted. Sarah jumped from the helicopter into darkness, landing hard on rocky ground and immediately moving away from the aircraft. Her teammates landed around her in a tight formation, and within seconds the helicopter was gone, leaving them alone in enemy territory. The silence was absolute. After months of training in Virginia forests, the Afghan landscape felt alien and threatening. Sarah activated her night vision goggles and scanned their surroundings, seeing nothing but rocks and sparse vegetation. Team rally, she whispered into her radio, using hand signals to guide her teammates to a defensive position among a cluster of boulders. Thompson established security while Martinez checked their GPS position. Johnson tested her communications intercept equipment, designed to monitor enemy radio traffic during their approach. Sarah verified their location on her tactical map and planned their route to the target. We're 800 meters from the facility, she reported quietly. Approach Route Alpha as briefed. Movement in bounds. Communications discipline until contact. They moved through the Afghan night like ghosts, using skills learned in Virginia training, but applied now in an environment where detection meant death. Sarah led from the front, constantly evaluating terrain and potential threats while monitoring her team's movement behind her. The communications facility appeared exactly as described in their intelligence briefings. A compound of low buildings surrounded by perimeter fencing, with communication antennas clearly visible against the starlit sky. But intelligence briefings couldn't capture the sense of danger that Sarah felt as they observed their target. Johnson, any electronic activity? Sarah whispered. Dr. Johnson monitored her intercept equipment. Multiple radio frequencies active, encrypted traffic consistent with coordination center operations. Martinez, security assessment. 2 guards visible on the perimeter, patrol pattern every 12 minutes. Motion sensors on the fence line, but we can bypass those with the approach route we planned. Thompson, backup communications. Satellite link is active, backup radio checked, and ready. Sarah studied the facility through her binoculars, comparing what she saw with the layout they had memorized. Everything matched the intelligence, but she felt something was wrong. The security seemed too light for such an important facility. Team leader, Thompson's voice was barely audible. Movement on the ridge to our east. Sarah turned her night vision toward the ridge and saw figures moving in the darkness. They were too far away to identify, but their movement patterns suggested trained personnel. How many, she asked. At least 6, possibly more. They're not moving like civilians. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she realized their mission had just become more complicated. The presence of additional enemy forces meant the facility was more heavily defended than intelligence had indicated. Johnson, any radio traffic indicating they know we're here? Negative. Radio traffic is routine coordination, nothing about security alerts. Sarah had to make a decision. They could abort the mission and call for extraction, or they could proceed despite the unexpected complications. 7 months of training had taught her that missions rarely went exactly as planned, and that success depended on adapting to changing circumstances. We proceed, she decided. Modified approach, Route Bravo to avoid the ridge. Timeline compressed to 15 minutes inside the facility. They moved toward their target using an alternate route that took them farther from the unknown personnel on the ridge, but required crossing more open ground. Sarah led them through terrain that offered minimal concealment, relying on darkness and their training to remain undetected. The perimeter fence was exactly as described in their briefings. Chain link topped with razor wire, with motion sensors spaced every 50 meters. But Martinez had trained for this specific obstacle, and he bypassed the sensors using techniques learned from Army Special Forces engineering courses. Fence is clear, he reported. 30-second window for crossing. They slipped through the gap Martinez created and moved immediately to cover among the facility's buildings. Sarah could hear voices from inside the main communication center, speaking in what sounded like Arabic mixed with local dialects. Johnson, establish intercept position, Sarah ordered. Thompson, exterior security. Martinez, prepare charges for the equipment. Dr. Johnson set up her communications intercept equipment to monitor and record radio traffic, while Martinez began placing explosive charges on the facility's critical systems. Thompson positioned himself to watch for approaching threats, while Sarah coordinated their activities. The mission proceeded exactly as they had trained, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The facility was too lightly guarded, the security too easy to bypass, the entire operation too smooth. Team leader, Johnson's voice was urgent. I'm intercepting radio traffic about a meeting scheduled here tonight. Multiple senior leaders are arriving within the hour. Sarah realized why the facility seemed wrong. They hadn't stumbled onto a routine communication center. They had walked into a high-value target meeting that intelligence hadn't detected. Martinez, how long for the charges? 3 minutes. Thompson, any movement? Still quiet, but I don't like it. Sarah faced a decision that her training hadn't specifically prepared her for. They could complete their original mission and extract, or they could attempt to gather intelligence on the meeting Johnson had detected. The second option was far more dangerous, but potentially much more valuable. Johnson, can you record the meeting communications? Affirmative. My equipment can capture everything if we stay for the meeting. Sarah weighed the risks against the potential intelligence value. A meeting of senior enemy leaders represented the kind of opportunity that might not come again for months. We stay, she decided. Modified mission. Plant charges, but don't detonate until after we record the meeting. Martinez finished placing his explosive charges and joined the team in a defensive position among the facility's storage buildings. They settled in to wait for the meeting, knowing that every minute they remained increased their risk of detection. 20 minutes later, vehicles began arriving at the facility. Sarah watched through her binoculars as men who were clearly senior leaders entered the main building. Johnson's equipment recorded their radio communications while Thompson maintained security, and Martinez prepared to activate the charges on Sarah's command. The meeting lasted an hour, during which Johnson captured communications that detailed planned attacks on coalition forces throughout Afghanistan. The intelligence they gathered in that hour was worth more than dozens of routine combat operations. Team leader, Thompson whispered urgently. Movement on the perimeter. Multiple vehicles approaching. Sarah looked toward the facility entrance and saw headlights in the distance. Someone was arriving who wasn't expected, and that meant their mission had just become a potential combat situation. Johnson, how much more do you need? Meeting is breaking up. I have everything. Martinez, stand by to detonate charges. Thompson, prepare for rapid extraction. The unexpected vehicles reached the facility just as the meeting participants began leaving. Sarah watched through her binoculars as armed men emerged from the vehicles and began talking urgently with the facility guards. They know something's wrong, Martinez observed. Johnson, pack up. We're leaving now. They began moving toward their extraction route, just as shouts erupted from the facility's main building. Someone had discovered evidence of their presence, though Sarah wasn't sure what had given them away. Movement behind us, Thompson reported. Armed personnel moving to surround the facility. Sarah realized they were about to be trapped inside the perimeter they had penetrated so easily. The mission had gone from routine surveillance to potential combat in a matter of minutes. Martinez, detonate charges. We need confusion to cover our extraction. The explosions lit up the Afghan night as the facility's communications equipment was destroyed. The noise and flames created the distraction Sarah needed to lead her team toward the perimeter fence. But as they reached their original entry point, muzzle flashes erupted from the darkness ahead of them. The personnel Thompson had spotted on the ridge had moved to block their escape route. Contact front, Sarah called out, dropping to cover behind a concrete barrier. For the first time in her life, Sarah Chun was under fire in actual combat. The training exercises had been intense, but nothing compared to the sound of bullets snapping past her head and the knowledge that people were actively trying to kill her. Johnson, call for emergency extraction, she ordered. Thompson, return fire. Martinez, find us another way out. Dr. Johnson activated her satellite communication system and called for immediate helicopter support, while Thompson engaged the enemy personnel blocking their route. Martinez studied their surroundings for alternate escape routes. Extraction inbound, 15 minutes. Johnson reported. We don't have 15 minutes. Thompson called back as he fired at muzzle flashes in the darkness. Sarah realized she had to do something her training hadn't specifically covered. Lead her team through actual combat, while improvising solutions to problems they hadn't anticipated. Martinez, can you breach the fence on the south side? Affirmative. 60 seconds. Thompson, covering fire. Johnson, stay with me. They moved through the facility under fire, using buildings for cover while Martinez worked to create an alternate escape route. Sarah found herself thinking clearly despite the chaos, applying her training while adapting to circumstances that were beyond any simulation. Martinez breached the fence just as enemy personnel began closing in on their position. Go, go, go! They escaped through the gap in the fence as the facility burned behind them and moved rapidly toward their extraction landing zone. Sarah could hear vehicles pursuing them, but the darkness and rocky terrain gave them advantages that training had taught her to exploit. Extraction bird inbound, Johnson announced. 2 minutes. They reached the landing zone just as the helicopter appeared over the ridge, its door gunners providing covering fire as Sarah's team boarded. As they lifted off, Sarah looked back at the burning communications facility and realized that Project Deepwater had just proven itself in actual combat. Control, this is Deepwater Team, she reported as they flew towards safety. Mission accomplished. Facility destroyed. High-value intelligence gathered. Team intact. Deepwater Team, this is Control. Outstanding work. Debrief upon return to base. Sarah looked at her 3 teammates, seeing exhaustion and exhilaration in their faces. They had completed their first operational mission successfully, but she knew that combat had changed all of them in ways they were still discovering. Team leader, Martinez said over the helicopter intercom. That was nothing like training. No, Sarah replied. It was much harder and much more important. As they flew through the Afghan night toward their base, Sarah realized that Project Deepwater had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. They had proven that civilians could be transformed into effective special operations personnel, but more importantly, they had proven it to themselves. The mission was a success, but Sarah knew it was only the beginning. Admiral Harrison had warned them that operational deployments would test them in ways training never could. Now she understood what he meant, and she was ready for whatever came next. The conference room in the Pentagon felt different than it had 18 months earlier when Sarah Chun first learned about Project Deepwater. The same classified maps covered the walls. The same secure communication equipment hummed quietly in the corners. But the atmosphere had changed from anticipation to something much heavier. Admiral Harrison sat at the head of the table, his face showing the strain of decisions that went far beyond normal military operations. Commander Walsh occupied her usual position, but her folders now contained after-action reports rather than recruitment materials. Dr. Stevens was absent. She had been reassigned to other projects months earlier when the political implications of Deepwater became clear. Sarah entered the room wearing civilian clothes, but carrying herself with the bearing of someone who had learned to kill efficiently and without hesitation. 18 months of training and operations had transformed her completely, though the cost of that transformation was still being calculated. She was alone. For the first time since the program began, she was the only member of Project Deepwater in the room. "Ms. Chun," Admiral Harrison said quietly, "please sit." Sarah took her chair and waited. She had learned patience during months of surveillance operations, but today felt different from any mission briefing she had received. "Where are the others?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Commander Walsh opened her folder and removed 3 files. Lieutenant Martinez was killed 4 days ago during a classified operation in Iraq. Staff Sergeant Thompson is missing and presumed dead following a mission in Afghanistan that went wrong. Dr. Johnson. Walsh paused, clearly struggling with the words. Dr. Johnson is alive, but has been hospitalized following a psychological break after her last assignment. She will not be returning to operational status. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. She had known that operational deployments carried risks, but somehow she had believed her teammates were too good, too well-trained, too important to be lost to the random violence of covert warfare. "How did Martinez die?" she asked. Admiral Harrison answered. Carlos was leading a team to extract a high-value intelligence source for Baghdad. The operation was compromised, and his team was ambushed. He held off enemy forces long enough for the source to be evacuated, but he was killed in the process. And Thompson. Michael's team was conducting electronic surveillance in eastern Afghanistan when they lost contact with base. We found the remains of their equipment, but no trace of personnel. Intelligence suggests they were captured, but we have no confirmation. Sarah absorbed this information with the emotional control that 18 months of covert operations had taught her. But underneath the professional composure, she felt the weight of loss that would never leave her. "Elena," she asked about Dr. Johnson. Commander Walsh consulted her notes. "Dr. Johnson completed 6 successful operations after your team was split into individual assignments. But her last mission involved infiltrating a terrorist cell that was planning attacks on American schools. The psychological pressure of maintaining cover while surrounded by people planning to murder children apparently exceeded her ability to cope. Where is she now?" "Bethesda Naval Hospital. Psychiatric evaluation and treatment." Sarah stared at the table, thinking of the brilliant woman who had learned to kill as efficiently as she analyzed ancient languages. Elena Johnson had been the intellectual foundation of their team, the person who understood the strategic implications of their tactical operations. The idea that she had been broken by the psychological demands of covert work was almost incomprehensible. "Ms. Chun," Admiral Harrison said gently, "I asked you here today because Project Deepwater is being terminated." Sarah looked up from the table. "Sir, the program has been too successful. Your team's operational effectiveness exceeded our projections, but the political and security implications have become unacceptable to senior leadership." "I don't understand." Commander Walsh leaned forward. Sarah, in 18 months your team completed 23 classified operations across 4 countries. You prevented terrorist attacks, gathered intelligence that saved lives, and eliminated threats that conventional special operations couldn't touch. Then, why are we being shut down? Admiral Harrison was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because you represent capabilities that civilian leadership finds too dangerous to continue. A program that can turn civilians into elite operatives operating outside normal military command structures raises questions about accountability and oversight that make politicians uncomfortable. Sarah felt anger building beneath her professional exterior. So they're shutting us down because we were too effective? They're shutting you down because effective covert operatives who technically don't exist are politically inconvenient, Commander Walsh said bluntly. Your successes have been classified beyond normal special operations channels. Officially, Project Deepwater never existed. What about the people we saved? The attacks we prevented? Those successes will be attributed to other units or left unexplained in official records. Sarah stood up and walked to the wall where maps showed the locations of operations she had participated in. Each pin represented missions where her team's unique capabilities had made the difference between success and failure. Admiral, what happens to me? You return to civilian life. Your position at DARPA has been held under medical leave cover. You resume your previous work as if the last 18 months never happened. And I'm supposed to pretend that Carlos and Michael and Elena never existed? You're supposed to maintain the security classifications that protect national security, Admiral Harrison said firmly. The work you did, the sacrifices your teammates made, they matter. But they can never be publicly acknowledged. Sarah turned back to face the table. What about support for Elena? Medical care, disability compensation? Dr. Johnson's treatment is being handled through classified medical protocols. She will receive the best possible care, but her service record will show psychological breakdown during a training exercise rather than operational deployment. And if I refuse to maintain silence? Commander Walsh's expression hardened. Then you would be violating security agreements that carry serious criminal penalties. But more importantly, you would be endangering other covert operatives who are still in the field. Sarah realized she was being presented with a choice between her own need for recognition and the safety of people still conducting classified operations. It wasn't really a choice at all. I want to visit Elena before I leave, she said. That can be arranged, Admiral Harrison agreed. But you'll be accompanied by security personnel, and your conversation will be monitored. Of course it will. Admiral Harrison stood up, and Sarah could see the genuine regret in his eyes. Ms. Chun, for what it's worth, Project Deepwater was the most successful special operations program I've ever been associated with. Your team accomplished things that career military personnel couldn't have done. But it doesn't matter because officially it never happened. It matters because unofficially it saved lives. Sometimes that has to be enough. Sarah left the Pentagon that day, carrying a discharge folder that identified her as a civilian contractor who had participated in classified training exercises. Her 18 months of operational service were reduced to a single paragraph describing participation in advanced technology evaluation programs. The drive to Bethesda Naval Hospital took her through Washington traffic that seemed surreal after months of operating in hostile territories where every vehicle might contain enemies. The ordinary civilian world felt alien to someone who had learned to think like a covert operative. Dr. Elena Johnson was in a private room on the psychiatric ward, staring out a window at a courtyard where patients walked in slow circles. She looked smaller than Sarah remembered, as if the psychological breakdown had physically diminished her. Elena, Sarah said quietly. Johnson turned from the window, and Sarah saw recognition flicker in her eyes. Sarah, they told me you might come. How are you feeling? Elena smiled, but it wasn't the sharp, intelligent expression Sarah remembered. I feel like someone who spent 6 months pretending to believe that killing American children was God's work. How do you think I feel? Sarah sat down in the chair beside the bed. I am sorry. For what? We both knew the risks when we signed up. For not being there with you. For letting the team get split up. Elena looked back out the window. You know what the hardest part was? Not the fear, not the danger. not even having to watch them plan those attacks. The hardest part was knowing that I could stop them at any time, but if I acted too soon, we wouldn't learn about the larger network. You saved lives, Elena. The intelligence you gathered prevented attacks that would have killed hundreds of children. I know. The doctors keep telling me that. But knowing something intellectually and believing it emotionally are very different things. They sat in silence for several minutes before Elena spoke again. Sarah, they're shutting down the program, aren't they? Yes. And they're going to pretend we never existed. Yes. Elena nodded as if she had expected this. Carlos and Michael, both dead. Elena closed her eyes. I should have known. We were too effective for them to let us continue, but too dangerous for them to acknowledge what we did. Sarah reached over and took Elena's hand. We mattered. What we did mattered. I know, but sometimes mattering isn't enough to make the nightmares stop. A security officer appeared in the doorway, indicating that Sarah's visit time was ending. She squeezed Elena's hand once more before standing to leave. Sarah, Elena called out as she reached the door. Don't let them make you forget who you became. You're not the same person who walked into that conference room 18 months ago. I know. Good. Because the world needs people who can do what we learn to do, even if the world doesn't want to acknowledge that those people exist. 6 months later, Sarah Chen sat in her old office at DARPA, staring at computer code that seemed trivial after everything she had experienced. Her colleagues welcomed her back from medical leave without asking too many questions about the 18 months she had been absent. She had returned to her previous life, but Elena Johnson had been right. She was not the same person who had left this office to attend a mysterious meeting in conference room 2A7. She was someone who had killed enemies in defense of her country, someone who had led teams through missions that officially never happened, someone who carried the memory of friends who had died for operations that would never be acknowledged. The work felt empty now. Designing communication systems for future military applications seemed insignificant compared to using those systems in actual combat operations. But Sarah understood that this was her life now, carrying the weight of experiences she could never discuss, remembering sacrifices that would never be officially recognized. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she would drive to Arlington National Cemetery and walk among the headstones of people who had died serving their country. She would think about Carlos Martinez, whose death had been attributed to a training accident, and Michael Thompson, who was listed as missing during a routine exercise that never existed. She would think about Elena Johnson, still in psychiatric treatment for a breakdown that officially resulted from the stress of academic research rather than months of infiltrating terrorist cells. And she would think about herself, carrying the memory of all of them while pretending to be someone she had never really been. 2 years after Project Deepwater was terminated, Sarah received an encrypted email with no return address. It contained a single photograph, the 4 members of Project Deepwater standing together after completing their first successful mission in Afghanistan. They looked exhausted, dirty, and absolutely determined. Below the photograph was a single line of text. Some things should never be forgotten. A friend. Sarah printed the photograph and placed it in a frame on her desk, where it remained for the next 20 years. Colleagues who asked about it were told it was a picture from a corporate team-building exercise. Only Sarah knew that it showed 4 people who had volunteered to become something that had never existed before, who had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, and who had paid prices that could never be calculated. When she finally attended